You know, usually when we talk about high-stakes situations, we tend to picture these massive, dramatic action.
Right, like explosions or
Yeah,
loud confrontations in the public square.
exactly. Bold moves where everyone knows exactly what is happening. But sometimes, sometimes the absolute highest stakes are wrapped up in moments that are totally quiet.
Secretive, even.
Yeah, secretive. Sometimes the greatest power really just lies in the tension of the unseen. So welcome to this deep dive.
It's great to be here.
We have a very special reflection for you today, specifically crafted for this season of Lent. Today is Friday, March 20th, 2026.
The Friday of the fourth week of Lent.
Right. And for our reflection today, we are diving into the 7th chapter of John's Gospel, specifically verses 1 to 10, and then skipping to 25 through 30.
And honestly, this passage reads less like a traditional sermon and much more like like a covert thriller.
It really does. And our mission today is to unpack this narrative, focusing on what we might call the paradox of the hidden Messiah.
Which is such a fascinating concept. We're going to explore this profound tension between divine hiddenness and public provocation.
Yeah, and look at the deep psychological irony of thinking you know someone. Plus, we'll unpack the completely unstoppable mechanics of divine timing.
It's a lot, but what a setup it is. John paints a picture of a literal geopolitical and religious powder keg.
Yeah, so Jesus is staying up in the northern region of Galilee. He is actively avoiding the southern region of Judea because the religious authorities there are, well, they're actively looking for a chance to kill him.
It's a literal manhunt.
Right. Then John notes that the Jewish Feast of Booths is about to happen. Jesus' brothers head up to Jerusalem for it, and Jesus eventually follows them. But, and this is the covert part, he goes, quote, not publicly, but in private.
Slipping in under the radar.
Exactly. Now, before we get into the sneaking around, we need some context here. What exactly is this Feast of Booths, and, why does it make the situation so dangerous?
That is the perfect question. Because without understanding the setting, the danger just doesn't fully translate. The Feast of Booths, or Sukkot, wasn't just some minor holiday.
A big deal, right?
Oh, a massive deal. It was one of the three great pilgrimage festivals in ancient Judaism. It happened in the autumn, celebrating the final harvest, but it also commemorated the Israelites wandering in the wilderness.
So people are traveling from all over.
Hundreds of thousands of pilgrims would flood into Jerusalem. I mean, the city's population would multiply exponentially overnight.
Wow.
And to remember their ancestors' time in the desert, everyone would build these temporary fragile shelters, these booths or tents, all over the city.
Like everywhere.
Everywhere. On rooftops, in courtyards, literally in the streets.
So you have a massively overcrowded city, people living in makeshift tents, and intense religious fervor. That just sounds like a logistical nightmare for anyone trying to keep the peace.
Exactly. It was a sensory overload and a political nightmare. You have Roman soldiers on high alert, staring down from the Antonia fortress, terrified of a riot.
Just waiting for something to kick off.
Right. And you have the Jewish religious elite, the Sanhedrin, trying to maintain their fragile authority and keep the Romans appeased.
And into this absolute tinderbox walks Jesus.
A rural preacher from the north who has already disrupted the religious status quo. He's healed on the Sabbath. He's claimed unprecedented authority.
And the authorities want him dead. Not just because they disagreed with his theology, but because they viewed him as a literal threat to the survival of their nation under Roman occupation.
Exactly. If he started a populist uprising at the Feast of Booths, the Romans would slaughter them all.
Okay, that completely reframes the stakes. It's like a controversial dissident trying to slip into a heavily militarized capital during, like, the biggest national holiday of the year.
Which is why he sneaks in. He travels in private, avoiding the main caravan roads.
But here's where I have to push back a little bit. If Jesus is the divine Son of God, why the secrecy? I mean, isn't he supposed to be utterly fearless? Why is the Messiah slipping in through the back alley?
It is a brilliant tension. And the answer reveals a massive difference between human recklessness and divine purpose.
How so?
Well, there is this very common, perhaps somewhat naive assumption that having true faith or walking in a divine calling means you just throw yourself headlong into danger, trusting that God will catch you.
Right, like jumping off a cliff and expecting wings.
Exactly. But that is not how providence works here. Jesus is navigating intense, lethal human hostility, but he is strictly operating on a divine schedule. Prudence is not the opposite of faith.
It's almost like prudence is the vehicle for faith in this case.
Precisely.
Yeah.
Because exposing himself to a lethal mob before the exact right moment would actually be a failure of the mission.
So he's managing his visibility because his ultimate sacrifice is tied to a very specific, unalterable timeline.
What John repeatedly calls his hour. To force a premature confrontation at the beginning of the festival would be to let human anger dictate the terms of salvation.
Rather than divine wisdom. That makes so much sense.
And for you listening to this, there is a very real practical application here. We often feel this immense cultural pressure to always be loud, to always make bold, public declarations.
Oh, definitely. Like you have to fight every battle the moment it presents itself.
Right. But this text reminds us that there is profound power in quiet, strategic obedience. There is a season for moving carefully, protecting your purpose, and operating in private until the actual appointed time arrives.
That is such a liberating thought. You don't have to win every argument today. You don't have to expose your entire hand right now.
Exactly. You can wait for the right moment.
But, and here's where the narrative gives a severe whiplash, because he doesn't stay hidden. We jump forward slightly in the chapter to verses 25 through 27.
Things change very quickly.
Suddenly, Jesus is not in the back alleys anymore. He is standing right in the middle of the temple courts. I mean, the most public, heavily guarded place in the city. And he is teaching openly.
Right out in the open.
Wait, you just said he was being strategic and covert to avoid a premature death. How is walking into the literal headquarters of the people trying to kill him strategic?
It seems like a contradiction, right? But it's actually the turning of the gears of that divine timeline we just talked about.
Okay, walk me through that.
He waited until the middle of the feast. The initial frenzy of the crowds arriving had settled. He didn't come in leading a parade. He simply appeared in the place of ultimate religious authority and began to teach.
So he isn't being reckless. He is deliberately shifting from hiddenness to provocation.
Because the moment for the next phase of the mission has arrived.
And the crowd's reaction is just absolute bewilderment. John writes that some of the people of Jerusalem start saying to each other, "Is not this the man whom they seek to kill? And here he is, speaking openly, and they say nothing to him."
They're completely baffled.
They are watching the religious authorities, the people who desperately want Jesus eliminated, completely freeze up. They literally wonder out loud if the Sanhedrin has secretly realized he is the Messiah.
But then, almost instantly, the crowd talks themselves out of that possibility.
Based on some flawed logic, right?
Deeply flawed.
Yeah.
A deeply flawed theological assumption. They say, but we know where this man comes from. And when the Christ appears, no one will know where he comes from.
Yes. This part is fascinating to me. They dismiss him entirely because he is familiar to them. They think, oh, we know this guy. He's Jesus from Nazareth. We know his zip code. We know his family.
It's a classic case of familiarity breeding contempt.
It reminds me of a dynamic we see all the time today. Think about someone you grew up with. Maybe you knew them when they were 7 years old, eating paste in the back of the classroom.
We all know that kid.
Right. And fast forward 30 years, and they are a brilliant neurosurgeon or a renowned author. But when you look at them, your brain struggles to accept their brilliance.
You just see the kid with the paste.
Exactly. The hometown prodigy syndrome.
Yeah.
The familiarity you have with their origin completely blinds you to the reality of who they have become.
That is a perfect analogy. And what is happening in Jerusalem is that exact psychological dynamic, but playing out on a catastrophic spiritual level.
A profound familiarity blindness.
Yes. They know Jesus' earthly geography, they know Nazareth, they know the region of Galilee, but because they possess that superficial earthly data, they arrogantly assume they know everything there is to know about him.
But why did they think the Messiah was supposed to just drop out of nowhere? I mean, where did they get the idea that no one will know where he comes from?
It's strange, isn't it?
Yeah, that's not in the ancient prophecies of Isaiah or Micah. Micah literally says the ruler will come from Bethlehem.
You are hitting on a crucial piece of historical context. To understand their blindness, you have to understand the literature they were reading at the time.
Okay, what were they reading?
Between the end of the Old Testament and the time of Jesus, there was a roughly 400-year period. During that time, a new genre of Jewish writing became wildly popular apocalyptic literature.
Like 1 Enoch or 4 Ezra?
Exactly. In these popular traditions, the expectation of the Messiah shifted. He wasn't just going to be a descendant of David, born in a normal town.
It became more mythic.
The popular myth evolved to say the Messiah would be a strictly cosmic figure, hidden away by God, who would suddenly magically appear on the roof of the temple in a blaze of glory.
So they had a cultural script. They had built this rigid box of how God should act and exactly what God should look like when he finally shows up to save them.
Exactly. They wanted an enigma. They wanted something totally detached from the grit and grime of regular human existence.
And because Jesus had an earthly address, because he had calluses on his hands from working as a carpenter in Nazareth, he failed their test.
The ultimate tragedy of the incarnation, the reality of God becoming human, is that the divine entered into the ordinary, and the crowd rejected the divine precisely because he looked too ordinary.
It really makes you stop and think about our own lives. For you listening right now, how often do we do the exact same thing?
Oh, all the time.
How often do we completely miss a moment of profound grace or miss the voice of God simply because it comes packaged in the ordinary?
We look at the everyday people around us, the totally routine, frustrating situations we find ourselves in, and we think, God can't possibly be working in this.
Right. I know exactly where this comes from. I know how mundane this is. We box out the extraordinary because we are too comfortable with our own assumptions.
It is a persistent human failing to assume that if we understand the mechanics of a thing or the origin of a thing, we have somehow exhausted its ultimate meaning.
The crowds in Jerusalem thought their geographical trivia was the whole truth.
They didn't realize it was just the very outer layer of a cosmic reality standing right in front of them.
And Jesus does not just let them sit in that flawed logic. He challenges it head on. Building right on their confident ignorance, he calls out across the temple courts.
He claps back.
He really does. Verse 28 says, he proclaimed, "You know me, and you know where I come from, but I have not come of my own accord. He who sent me is true, and him you do not know. I know him, for I come from him, and he sent me."
That is a massive escalation.
A devastating indictment. Notice how he systematically dismantles their pride. He starts by ironically conceding their points, like, sure, you know my earthly origins.
But then he immediately pulls the veil back. He shifts the focus from his earthly geography to his divine sender.
And then he drops the hammer. Him you do not know.
You have to imagine the absolute shock of that statement.
I mean, you are standing in the most sacred site in Judaism, sir, because if they truly knew the Father, they would instantly recognize the Son standing in their midst.
Exactly.
You can almost feel the oxygen get sucked right out of the temple courtyard when he says that, which leads us to the explosive climax of this passage. The tension snaps.
It reaches a boiling point.
Verse 30 says, "So they were seeking to arrest him, but no one laid a hand on him because his hour had not yet come." I mean, picture this. They are furious.
They have the motive. The temple guards are right there. The mob is rioting.
They want to grab him and drag him away to be stoned, but absolutely nothing happens. Nobody touches him.
The authorities are utterly paralyzed. And John gives us the exact theological mechanism for why.
Because his hour had not yet come.
This brings us to the core. So what insight of this entire narrative? We have spent this deep dive looking at human chaos.
The plots to kill him in Judea, the covert travel, the confusion of the festival crowds.
The sudden public provocation, the white-hot anger flaring up to an attempted arrest. But despite all of that immediate, pressing, physical threat, human will absolutely cannot override divine timing.
It's almost hard to wrap your head around. I mean, how does that practically work? It's not like there was a literal sci-fi force field glowing around him, zapping the guards when they tried to reach out.
No, it's far more profound than a physical barrier. Think of it like a masterfully orchestrated stage play.
Okay, stage play.
You have actors on the stage, and maybe the audience is getting restless, maybe someone in the front row is screaming, maybe one of the actors even wants to skip ahead to the final tragic scene.
Chaos in the theater.
Exactly. But none of that chaos matters because they are bound by the script and the director controls the lighting and the curtain. The scene simply cannot end and the climax cannot occur until the director cues it. The overarching authority of the director renders the chaos of the actors powerless to change the timeline.
I love that analogy. The mob might be screaming for the final act, but the director hasn't called for it yet. God is ultimately in control of the timeline.
The appointed hour, the specific predetermined moment for Jesus' ultimate sacrifice on the cross, is fixed by divine authority.
Until that precise moment arrives, all the fury, all the political maneuvering, and all the power of the Sanhedrin and Rome combined amount to absolutely nothing.
They're entirely powerless to force the hand of God.
That is the ultimate comfort hidden inside this tense thriller. It reveals the sovereign architecture underneath the chaos of history.
The threat against Jesus was terrifyingly real, but that adversity was not the supreme authority. God's timeline was supreme.
Which changes everything about how we look at our own lives today.
It really does.
Think about it. We all experience moments where it feels like the walls are rapidly closing in. Maybe you are facing a massive crisis at work that threatens your livelihood.
Or maybe it is a sudden, terrifying health scare.
Or maybe you are in a hostile relational situation where you feel completely outmatched, surrounded, and misunderstood. Just like Jesus, surrounded by a crowd actively seeking to arrest him.
When circumstances spiral out of our control, our immediate biological response is to panic.
Because human nature craves control. When we face uncertainty or hostility, we want to grip the steering wheel tighter.
You want to force outcomes, manipulate variables, or run away entirely.
Exactly. But the truth of this gospel passage is telling us that we don't have to panic. Because the ultimate hour of our lives belongs to God, not to the chaos of the world.
Just like no temple guard could lay a hand on Jesus because it wasn't the appointed time, we can trust that our lives, our profound challenges, and our timelines are being held by that exact same director.
The world can rage, circumstances can deteriorate, but they do not get to dictate the final hour. Recognizing that gives you permission to exhale.
It allows you to walk through incredibly hostile or uncertain environments with a sense of anchored peace that simply doesn't make logical sense to the outside world.
It reorients your entire perspective. You stop operating from a place of frantic reaction, and you start operating from a place of deep structural trust.
You can stand in the middle of your own metaphorical temple courtyard, face the opposition, and speak truth, knowing that your hour is held in the hands of the Father.
So bringing all these threads together, this passage from John gives us a brilliant, challenging paradox.
It challenges us to look much closer at our lives, to strip away our assumptions, and to actively look for God in the ordinary, familiar things we usually write off.
We have to avoid the tragic trap that the crowds in Jerusalem fell into. And simultaneously, it comforts us with the ironclad promise that we can trust entirely in God's perfect timing, even when everything around us feels dangerous and out of control.
Which leaves you with an important question to mull over as you continue through your day.
Let's hear it.
Think deeply about your routines, your relationships, and your environment. What if the things in your life that you think you understand perfectly, the things you find ordinary or even frustrating, are exactly the places where you are missing God's presence the most?
That is a profound thought to carry with you. So, to wrap up our time together, let's close with a short prayer based on this passage.
That sounds wonderful.
Lord Jesus, you walked boldly into the temple when the time was right, perfectly trusting in the Father's overarching plan. Give us the grace to recognize you in the ordinary, familiar moments of our lives, stripping away our assumptions. When we face deep opposition, uncertainty, or anxiety, grant us the profound peace of knowing that our lives unfold according to your perfect appointed hour. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. We hope you take these insights, carry them into your Lenten journey today, and let them reshape how you see the ordinary moments around you. We invite you to join us back here tomorrow for another exploration. Until then, keep looking deeper.